As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria have continued through the weekend after the U.S. launched airstrikes in eastern Syria early Friday. So Lebanon's Al Mayadeen, media outlet based in Lebanon, they reported that a group calling itself the Islamic Resistance in Iraq said that it successfully targeted the U.S.'s al-Shaddadi base in Syria, which is located in northeastern Syria's al-Hasaka province. And this was on Sunday that they claimed this attack. And the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is based in the UK, they also reported a drone attack on the al-Shaddadi base. So it was reported by multiple sources. And their report said that explosions were heard in the area and that smoke columns rose from the base. Al-Mayadeen also reported an overnight attack on a U.S. base in Syria's eastern Deir ez-Zor province. So these attacks that happened on Sunday have not yet been confirmed by the U.S. military. U.S. officials have confirmed to the Associated Press that a U.S. base in eastern Syria came under attack on Friday after the U.S. launched those airstrikes. And U.S. officials also said a drone was fired at the Ain al-Assad air base in western Iraq, which houses U.S. troops. And they say that drone was shot down. No casualties have been reported yet in these attacks, but again, I don't think we know the full picture yet. And another thing, I haven't seen any reports of casualties in the U.S. airstrikes in eastern Syria, so we'll see if more comes out about that. But, you know, the U.S. is saying, the White House is saying one purpose of these airstrikes that they launched in eastern Syria was to deter further attacks. And I know I've talked about this before, but the U.S. has, you know, under Biden, it happened a lot under Trump too, has launched airstrikes like this against the Shia militias in Iraq that operate in Iraq and Syria. And sometimes they respond, sometimes they back down. And I suspected with everything that's going on in Gaza that they weren't going to back down, and they haven't. And the White House is saying that the purpose of the strikes was to deter further attacks. Clearly that is a failed strategy. A new House Speaker says Russia, China, and Iran are the new axis of evil. So we got a new speaker and we got a new axis of evil. So Johnson, and this was in an interview, I think with Sean Hannity this past Thursday night. So he told Sean, it's right there. I should have just kept reading. He told Sean Hannity that China, Russia, and Iran make up an axis of evil that poses a huge threat to the U.S. So he said, quote, big priorities in this moment right now. We have Israel being attacked. We have unrest. We have the Ukraine situation we've got to deal with. We have China being aggressive. We have Iran with all the meddling, and China, Russia, and Iran working together. This is a dangerous time. Hamas and Hezbollah are proxies of Iran, and they're tied in now with Russia and China. I mean, it is a new axis of evil. That is how we see it, end quote. And claiming that these countries pose the biggest threat since World War II. And he also, again, supported continuing funding the proxy war in Ukraine. He said, quote, now we can't allow Vladimir Putin to prevail in Ukraine because I don't believe it would stop there. And it would probably encourage and empower China to perhaps make a move on Taiwan. We have these concerns. We're not going to abandon them, end quote. So even though Mr. Johnson here got an F on his report card from the neocons over at that, Republicans for Ukraine, this new group that they formed, it looks like he's going to go ahead and make sure the Ukraine war keeps getting funded, but the priority for him is Israel, but I don't think that means that they're not going to get the Ukraine aid. And it says that 2 months before Hamas attacked Israel, the Pentagon awarded a multi-million-dollar contract to build U.S. troop facilities for a secret base it maintains deep within Israel's Negev desert, just 20 miles from Gaza, code-named Site 512. Site 512. The long-standing U.S. base is a radar facility that monitors the skies for missile attacks on Israel. On October 7th, however, when thousands of Hamas rockets were launched, Site 512 saw nothing because it is focused on Iran more than 700 miles away. The U.S. Army is quietly moving ahead with construction at Site 512, a classified base perched atop Mount Har Karen in the Negev, to include what government records describe as a life support facility, which is military speak for barracks-like structures for personnel. Though President Joe Biden and the White House insist that there are no plans to send U.S. troops to Israel amid its war on Hamas, a secret U.S. military presence is already in existence, and the government contracts and budget documents show it is evidently growing. The $35.8 million U.S. troops facility, not publicly announced or previously reported, was obliquely referenced in a August 2nd contract announcement by the Pentagon. this is definitely something that they had the ball rolling on already. And now with all this stuff with Gaza and just the situation in the region, I'm sure that they're going to maybe even ramp this thing up to build it quicker, to get, U.S. troops in there. And like they mentioned in this article, this site with all these radars, we're looking at Iran. So now that they think there might be a big regional war and they want to help Israel, protect Israel, again, I could just see them speeding, these plans up.
You're listening to Part of the Problem on the Gas Digital Network.
Like, I mean, you could think like Hamas are a bunch of idiots. They pulled off a pretty coordinated, sophisticated attack on the most prepared country in the world, so maybe they're not that stupid. But what do you think they thought the response was going to be to this? They obviously knew Israel was going to go. Now, this is the whole point. This is the whole point of 9/11 was to provoke us into invading Afghanistan, where empires go to die. And this was the whole point of this, was to overreact and then turn the entire Muslim world against them and have all of Arabia, you know what I mean, like pissed off at them. And so what's really rewarding the terrorists? Like, I think you could make an argument that it's like, it would actually be less of a reward for them if you didn't fall into their trap. And then you go, well, what's the reward for like the innocent people who are not terrorists? Well, it would definitely be a reward to not kill them and their families. And it would definitely, look, however you feel about Osama bin Laden, let's say, because sometimes I'd get in these arguments with neocons where they'd be like, hey, he may say that the reason he hates America is because of our support for Israel and us propping up brutal dictators in the region, and that we killed so many people with the sanction blockade around Iraq, and that we've killed so many innocent Muslims. He may say that's why he hates us, but why he really hates us is because he's just pure evil. And now it's like, okay, yeah, I guess we can compete over psychoanalyzing the guy, but neither of us know what's in his heart, whatever. But how does he recruit people? How does he get so many people on his side? It's definitely by saying, look how horrible America's foreign policy is. And in fact, even our own FBI, because they've conducted like dozens and dozens of like entrapment, ploys where they get some young Muslim weirdo to like, detonate a bomb that's not real, and then they brag that they thwarted a terrorist attack.
Now give us more money so we can prevent even more.
Right. Now, every time when they approach those Muslim kids, you know what they do? They never approach them and go, and you can go look into the details, but take any case and you show me how they approach them. They never approach them by going, in the Quran it says this.
Right.
So don't you want to go kill these Americans?
Don't you feel bad for these victims?
Look at what they're doing.
Right.
Look at what they're doing in these wars. Look how many innocent Muslims and women have been shot. Are you going to let this happen to these little girls?
So the FBI knows how to radicalize someone.
Yes, they know exactly how to do it. Yes.
Yeah, that's wild.
So what is actually rewarding the terrorists and what isn't? It seems to me it would be rewarding them to boost their whole recruitment effort.
Right.
To like make to prove their narrative correct, at least partially, So anyway, it's really just amazing. It's I'll tell you, just a few weeks ago, I would have very confidently said that at least one of the neocons' major goals, which was war with Iran, had failed. And that whole, if you go back and listen to the Wesley Clark clip where he says in late 2001, he saw the plans already. By the way, that kind of lines up with what I was saying about letting Osama go. Because in late 2001, he's like, they already had the plans. And the plans weren't just, as he breaks down, it wasn't just that we were going to invade Iraq, which is bad enough, but that it was also that we're going to topple 7 Muslim countries in the next 5 years or whatever the exact numbers were. And the countries there were, if I'm remembering correctly, it was Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Somalia, I believe it was Lebanon, and maybe one others that I'm blanking on. Maybe it was Yemen. I can't remember. And then finally culminating with Iran. And we certainly got a lot of these, Sudan maybe, and we certainly got a lot of these, And now again, they didn't all. The attempt in Syria clearly failed when the Russians intervened. That's part of the reason why Russia's been the bad guy now since then. But a lot of these certainly did work, right? Like we had regime changes in a lot of these other countries, in Yemen, obviously we failed in Afghanistan as well, succeeded in Iraq, succeeded in Libya. But the Iran one, I was like, well, you just failed. Time ran out, and people in America are totally over regime change wars in the Middle East. So you didn't get the Iran one, thank God, because that's the toughest out of all of them. And now, the second this Hamas attack happens, every neocon is out pumping war with Iran, and you're kind of like, oh, they're back. They've been given a shot now to get this war that they always wanted. Whether that'll work or not, I'm still somewhat optimistic that it's just not possible. I think there's enough forces, even within the military, who resisted the neocons' demand for war with Iraq back in the day because they were like, we can't do this logistically. But it's pretty incredible to watch them say something like this. Like Blinken, it's like, what a reckless statement when, look.
Then we're with Russia.
Huh?
Also, by that standard, we're at war with Russia right now.
Oh yeah, right. Yes, but also the fact that you're like, okay, well, if American forces are attacked, but you're like, but where are the American forces exactly?
Oh yeah, that's
and you're
funny
like, oh
too.
yeah, well, because we have forces in Lebanon, We have forces in, Israel right now. We have these people like all over this region. We still have troops in Syria. And like, yeah, these are easy targets for Iran. But then it's also like, he was very clear to say if Iran or any of their proxies. So now you're saying,
Some
okay,
random other group.
essentially if a Shiite with a gun
Right.
kills someone, you can now go, oh, that's war with Iran.
Right.
That's war with a country 3 times the size of Iraq.
Right.
Who can hit a lot of our targets and a lot of Israeli targets
And
pretty
by the way,
easily.
you don't even need to have targets hit. I mean, the cartoonish story, which I'm still confused about from a couple days ago, where they said Hamas said a hospital was blown up, and then Israel said, no, you blew up your hospital. And then Israel said, fine, you didn't blow up your own hospital. It was this other group of people, which I was like, wait, there's another group of people? Sounds like you probably shouldn't take out Hamas and
By the way,
have a power
Israel had
vacuum.
also already warned about hitting this hospital
Right.
beforehand, which is why so many people assumed it was Israel to begin with.
Okay.
So,
But the point I'm trying to get at is we don't even know if targets are or are not being hit. And now there's apparently other groups of people who are just floating around in these areas. So you're telling me that someone who wants to get more hostilities going can't claim, look at this horrible thing that was,
Yes.
hey, we're going to, and look at what happened with the, when we said that there was going to be a red line of chemical weapons and they tried to pretend like chemical weapons had gone off in Syria.
Yep.
There's nothing quite like saying, hey, if anyone does this, then that's what's going to get us into this war as a,
well, that's that's part of the reason why it's so reckless, because then it's like, oh, well, now you've painted yourself into a corner where
Right.
the outcome is, at minimum, a horrific war, substantially harder than the war in Iraq.
Right.
And at maximum, a world war, which might be triggered by this. You can already see so many countries lining up. And it does seem like between this thing in Ukraine and now this, like it's almost like, is the goal here World War III? Or are you just like, this World War III thing doesn't seem to be coming together in Ukraine the way we hoped, so let's see if we can't get it going over here. I'm not saying it is, but it would almost kind of make sense if that was the strategy.
You and Larry and the other guests and I have argued that the war in Ukraine has burst the myth of NATO and Western invincibility. You and Larry and the others and I have argued that the events of October 7 in Israel have burst the myth of Israeli invincibility. What has all of this done to the myth of American invincibility, indispensability, if you will, around the world?
Judge, it's made a very, very small dent in it. And the proof is in the pudding. A very important meeting took place Thursday, Friday, Saturday, when the Chinese foreign minister, who was also a member of the ruling Politburo, visited Washington. No progress at all. No indication that Xi Jinping will come to San Francisco for that Asian summit, and no indication even that military communication ties have been restored between China and the U.S. Instead, just a lot of rhetoric. The Chinese very bitter about this. Chinese warning that they will not tolerate this kind of thing unless, as they put it, unless Biden changes his mind and starts being reasonable. So probably Xi is not going to come to San Francisco, and probably the lack of military ties will persist. Now we have the Russian defense minister in Beijing as we speak, talking together with the Chinese defense minister. They're talking about their joint efforts to tamp down hostilities in Ukraine and in the Middle East. Who represents the United States? The country director for China in the Defense Department. That's telling in and of itself. Somebody of that low rank can't have much impact on what these key leaders think.
We'll get back to Israel in a minute. Is the United States being intentionally provocative militarily toward the Chinese? And if so, I think you're going to say yes, because we have a tape of this. Why?
Well, Judge, we talked on Friday about that Chinese fighter that came within 10 feet of a B-52 bomber in the South China Sea. Now, what's a B-52 bomber doing in the South China Sea? In August, there was an incredibly close encounter of the very close kind between a U.S. ship and a Chinese ship in the South China Sea.
Here we go, Ray.
Yeah, there's a video of that, I think. Let's see if I can.
The one on the left is the American, is the Chinese. The one on the right is the American, almost aiming for the bow, certainly crossing in front of it. No?
That's quite correct. Now, this is a Ministry of Defense video from the Chinese. Nobody has taken any issue with it. It's, pictures don't lie. It came very close to cutting off the Chinese ship. Chinese ship was going straight. Now, that's what happened in August. The Chinese remonstrated, but the U.S. said, freedom of navigation, we can do what we want. So the point here is that any one of these incidents could cause a real clash. And if there's a real clash, the Chinese are prepared for it. They're saying, look, If we clash in the air or on the sea, we're ready for that. What are you going to do 6, 7, 8,000 miles away? It's
Okay,
very
so
dangerous.
let me ask you this: who would have made the decision for the U.S. warship to do that? The chief of naval operations, that's the head admiral, the secretary of defense, the president of the United States. I mean, this is so provocative. What level of authority can authorize this, and what would have motivated it?
Well, this is routine procedure. In other words, it's SOP, standard operating procedure for U.S. warships and U.S. aircraft to patrol very close to the Chinese mainland. Now, why they do that? Well, they say it's to assert freedom of navigation and freedom of airspace. But I dare say, if you looked at the Chinese doing that in the Caribbean or the Russians, it's a provocative step. But the Navy can do it. The Navy says we will do it, and it's a long-standing procedure. The B-52s, I've tried to check on that. I'm not sure how often B-52s fly that close because, after all, B-52s are nuclear capable. They're also capable of firing cruise missiles and so forth. They're not reconnaissance aircraft. So, yeah, these are deliberate provocations. They set off Chinese radar, but that's just a minor technical advantage. The real thing is to show who rules the South China Sea, and we're reluctant to admit that we can't really rule it anymore all by ourselves.
Tell me about intel capabilities on the Russian foreign minister and Chinese foreign minister communicating. Do we know what they're saying in real time from surveillance, or do we surmise what they're talking about?
What the Chinese and the Russian defense ministers are saying?
Yes.
Well, they're saying it in open forum just today. Reuters just reported that the Chinese are saying our relations with Russia have never been closer. We will face provocations together. And Shoigu, the Russian defense minister, has referred to the nuclear option very, very obliquely and not saying anything new. But every time he says, risking war with a nuclear capable country like us doesn't make any sense. There's some indication that Reuters still hopes that Xi Jinping will go to San Francisco. I say forget about that. And Reuters also says, they're trying to set up military communications between China and the United States. They're hopeful of that. Well, that's already been shot down as a result of Wang Yi, the foreign minister's visit to Washington late last week.
Okay.
They're saying it all in public. And the whole contour of the world correlation of forces has changed to the disadvantage of the United States, which has gotten a short stick of this isosceles triangle that I refer to now and then.
Welcome to Liberty Lockdown. Please scan your barcode. Your liberty ain't gone, but yeah, it's on hold.
First up, GOP presidential hopeful and buffet extraordinaire, Chris Christie. Let's hear what he has to say.
We know that they hide behind the falsity of free speech. There's a difference, everyone, between free speech and hate speech.
Is this Ibram X. Kendi or is this a GOP presidential candidate, Chris Christie? I can't tell. Interesting. There's a difference between free speech and hate speech. Oh, is there now, Chris?
There's a difference between free speech and violence. There's a difference between incitement and free speach. And what's going on our college campuses today is not free speech.
Yeah, kind of it is, actually, Chris. That's exactly what it is. If people say, from the mountain to the sea or whatever, Palestine will be free. Like, look, you can say that it has undertones that you find disturbing, whatever. It's still free speech, though. Free speech isn't about language that is, accepted by all. The whole reason we have this entire precept is that we want to be able to say unpopular things. When did we forget this? The GOP, when it came to racism and transphobia, no such thing as hate speech. As soon as it's about Israel, hate speech is the light switch is flipped back on.
We have been here before, haven't we?
Yeah, we've been here before, debating whether or not free speech should be permissible. It was the foundation of our country, and we decided yes. And then we put it in the fucking Bill of Rights as number 1, because we were like, yeah, we really mean this shit. We've had this debate before. Yeah, we have had this debate before. We already concluded. The answer is you can't do it. Constitutionally protected. Goodness gracious. I would very much like to not criminalize protests or speech. Could we not do that? Well, GOP, their donors say, yeah, we kind of do have to ban all that. Sick. Here's Donald Trump showing where his bread's buttered too.
On that terrible Saturday morning, the world saw once again that the conflict between Israel and Hamas is not a conflict between two equal sides. This is a fight between civilization and savagery, between decency and depravity, and between good and evil. There is no comparison between a group that worships death and a group that cherishes life and cherishes our nation. Every single life that is lost in this conflict is on the shoulders of Hamas alone.
Is this reminiscing at all to George W. Bush? I think if you play back the beginning of this episode, you'll hear a lot of similarities.
It arises directly from the Iraqi regime's own actions. Its history of aggression.
and its drive toward an arsenal of terror. It possesses and produces chemical and biological weapons. It is seeking nuclear weapons. Members of Congress of both political parties and members of the United Nations Security Council agree that Saddam Hussein is a threat to peace and must disarm. The same tyrant has tried to dominate the Middle East, has invaded and brutally occupied a small neighbor, has struck other nations without warning, and holds an unrelenting hostility toward the United States. Saddam Hussein is a homicidal dictator who is addicted to weapons of mass destruction. So Hamas alone, and I think you have to really add in the word Iran. Iran, people don't want to talk about it. There can be no sympathy, no excuses, and no escape from these monsters, and we will do what has to be done.
Oh my God. So yeah, that's the great hope for America first. Donald Trump says that, Iran, no one wants to talk about it. Well, I haven't found a GOP hopeful that doesn't want to talk about Iran right now, or Hezbollah for that matter. There's just no hope for non-interventionists from the GOP side. I hate to break it to you. I was on with Dave Smith last night on Part of the Problem. And we talked about this, and it's like, he and I we were messaging each other privately, talking about like, man, since he's not going to run, should we just like throw a hat in the ring behind RFK, Vivek, maybe some other GOP hopeful rises from the ashes, and seems like he's got a chance to win. That's truly Thomas Massey-esque, that like wants genuine non-intervention, genuine America first, genuine America only, because that's really what I am. I'm not America first. I'm America only. I don't want aid. I don't want military. I don't want anything. Our country cannot sustain it. We have to batten down the hatches. We have to bring our troops home. We have to bring our funds home. We can't continue to just deploy them to everybody that has needs all across the world, because it's really not about their needs. It's about our control. We all know this. We all know the reason. But we're losing control. We're losing our capacity to actually be this global hegemon, because financially, just math-wise, it will not continue. So anyways, Dave and I are floating around, Vivek and RFK. He's had both of them on his show. I've had Vivek on mine. We followed their campaigns very closely. RFK, phenomenal when it comes to, at least rhetorically. Just assume that when I say phenomenal, I mean rhetorically. I have no idea what these people would do in power. They could be totally deceiving me on all fronts. But rhetorically, great on the FBI, CIA, Ukraine, non-intervention, and the COVID era. That's offering me a lot. Terrible on a bunch of other stuff. I'm not going to recap that. It doesn't really matter. Vivek, fantastic on, once again, FBI, deep state, getting rid of the bureaucracy. I'm sure he'd be in favor of cutting taxes and regulations too. I never really talked to him about that. Great on ESG, DEI, and pretty good on non-intervention. I didn't like what he had to say about the cartels in Mexico, but he was pretty good on the rest of it. And I didn't love what he had to say about Taiwan either. But, for a GOP hopeful, that's about as good as you can ask for. And then Israel had its terrorist attack. And, RFK, even before that, had already kind of, kissed the ring. And over the past couple of days, I read the tweet that Vivek put out yesterday, but it's like, what do you say? Something to the effect of like, it's a chosen land for a chosen people. And, it's just like exactly what you would expect someone who's, under the thumb of the Israel lobby to say. And it's just super disappointing. So, that's my perspective, is like, this is the reason that Libertarian Party exists, because they're really, from the federal level, left and right, there's always a war that they want, that their donors want. And really the only people that are genuinely non-interventionists are us. Like, that's it. As far as I can tell. I hope that there's more out there, particularly the America First MAGA movement. I hope many of you are watching going, no, I am with you. I do not want to send my sons and daughters to the Middle East again. I don't want to send them to Ukraine to fight Russia. I don't want any of this. Okay, I'm not talking to you, and thank you. But in terms of the candidates on offer, oof, doesn't look like we got much of a path here, folks. So.
Here's the article we're talking about. This is from Politico, and it's not just this article, it's a couple of other things we have, but they write, Speaker Johnson's Ukraine views have been, quote, evolving. And this is a cautionary tale for what happens when you get power in D.C. Go to the next clip. This is Johnson before being Speaker, from the same article. Johnson's voting record doesn't bode well for Ukraine. He received an F on the Republican for Ukraine advocacy group's report card and has argued that there is insufficient oversight. Last year, he voted against sending Kiev a $40 billion package, saying it'd be better spent on priorities at home. Pre-Speaker Johnson, no way, Jose, money for Ukraine. Now that he's Speaker, go to the next one. Asked whether he supports more assistance to Ukraine on Wednesday, he was surprisingly clear. We all do. We're going to have conditions on that, so we're working through, he said. We want accountability, and we want objectives that are clear in the from the White House. So we all support it. And he went on Hannity to expound a little bit on his views on Ukraine and Russia. And they're surprisingly mainstream neocon, Dr. Paul. I'll go back one, actually. We don't need that one right now. We want to do the clip, the video clip of him on Hannity. I think we want to do you might want to grab your earpiece, Dr. Paul. Hang on just 1 second to get plugged in. Do those first 50 seconds to hear a little bit about what Mike Johnson really thinks about foreign policy.
Now, we can't allow Vladimir Putin to prevail in Ukraine because I don't believe it would stop there, and it would probably encourage and empower China to perhaps make a move on Taiwan. We have these concerns. We're not going to abandon them. We want to be cooperative. We need to work together on this, but we owe it to the people to know what the plan is, where the money's going to be spent, and we need some auditing for the dollars that we've already sent over there. These are not tough questions, right? The one thing that House Republicans are resolved on is that we must stand with our most important ally in the Middle East, and that's Israel. We will. We certainly hope that it doesn't come to boots on the ground. If it comes to that, and we communicated this to the White House staff as well today, that we have the Article 1 power in the legislative branch of government, and they have Article 2.
He makes a good point. So Mike Johnson, the new Speaker of the House, tells Sean Hannity, we can't allow Putin to prevail in Ukraine. U.S. boots on the ground may be required to stand with Israel. He supports Israel directly attacking Iran, and he calls Russia, China, and Iran the new axis of evil. So he is literally, Dr. Paul, a carbon copy of the Bush-era neocons. Mike Cernovich, who is a very well-known conservative Republican commentator, he tweeted this after watching this Hannity segment, and it's kind of interesting because the reason why this is interesting, I think, is, Dr. Paul, because we have to give credit to Thomas Massie, who says, you know what? McCarthy, for as bad as he is, getting rid of him may not be a good idea. Here's what Cernovich said. Republicans traded its greatest fundraiser in decades for an end-times obsessed evangelical who believes a large Middle Eastern war is what will usher in the return of Christ. Great stuff, guys. There's Cernovich. So there are people on the right who don't like this stuff. So anyway, sorry for the long intro, but the point is that, unfortunately, as Tom Woods says, no matter who you vote for, you always get John McCain.
This is not a good sign when the new speaker seems to have blended in. The American people want change. This is not a change. It's almost like, I was trying to get the definition of evolving. Maybe there's nothing evolving. Maybe you imply there's no change.
Yeah, I think it was chilling when he said, hey, I communicated with the White House. If we need U.S. boots on the ground in Israel, we've got Article 1, Article 2 powers. We can sort it out. Rather than saying, listen, you better come to Congress. Let us know what your plan is. What is your end game? What's the goal? What are the resources that we need you to make this declaration? We need the authorization. No, it's, hey, don't worry. It's just like in the Bush era. Just ask us, Mr. President, wink, wink. We'll get you whatever you want.
But never did he say that we have a constitutional obligation to defend ourselves in this country. They think that. They say, he killed an American over in Syria, so therefore, what are we doing there? And so few people ask that question. But fortunately, more people are asking the question, and we'll encourage people to keep asking the question because the popular attitude toward pumping more money into Ukraine seems to prevail, and most Americans now don't see any good of it, even though some in there are saying, yeah, we need it for Taiwan or something else.
Well, Speaker Johnson here shows his ignorance, and it's dangerous to have someone so ignorant being so warmongerish. He's encouraging Israel to attack Iran. He literally says that in this interview with Hannity. Well, in that case, I don't think you can put aside the very strong possibility that Russia would intervene to assist its ally Iran, because if Israel successfully defeats Iran, it will take out Assad in Syria, and it will take out a Russian military base in Syria. So essentially what he is literally arguing for is World War III. Rather than saying, guys, let's back down, let's find a peaceful way out of this, there's still time for us to stop the killing, he's saying, no, we need to ramp up the killing. Come on, Israel, attack Iran. That's what we want them to do. He's literally cheering on for World War III. But attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria continue after U.S. airstrikes. So we have, as we said last week, we occupy a third of Syria. We don't, but Washington does. A third of Syria. Still have a lot of troops in Iraq. People would say, why? And they'd say, well, because they're shooting us. We have to stay there. So there's this pattern of the U.S. having a military strike on some of these bases, and then strikes from different assets in the region against U.S. military bases, which leads to more strikes on the groups and over again. So there you go. But it is ramping up. It's heating up.
Sometimes I watch a lot of the business news, and sometimes you think the business people are less partisan and less into the foreign policy. But so often I hear the comments: the Americans were attacked, and an American was killed. Here we are, 7,000 miles away, putting sanctions on countries, and then all of a sudden they're attacking us. Well, how far did we have to go to make it available where they could attack it? Oh, 7,000 miles, that's all. So, but the whole concept that we have to be there, it's this fanaticism that goes along with empire. It never stops. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's power, but most of the time I think it's power, because some of the people who run the show have a lot of money. And but eventually, since it's all fake, there is a liquidation and a correction, but it's so painful. That is the problem. And what gets me is it's all preventable.
Yeah.
Bad policy does this, and most of the time it's government behind the scenes and the people being careless and lackadaisical and not paying attention, because as long as they get their food stamps, the big guys and the little guys, more the big guys, as long as we get to spend money, they don't lament these setbacks. Oh, more weapons to build.
Yeah.
It's a tragedy.